Don't stop.
Hi, thanks for joining me on the Everything and Anything in a Bit Gay podcast. I'm your host, Zach Randles-Friedman. I have interviewed so many amazing people over the past couple of years, and I was going through like upcoming guests because I have a pretty big backlog of guests that I need to release because I did so many interviews in the last quarter of 2025. And I just kept meeting so many interesting people, and they kept coming to me wanting to be on my show, and I said yes, and that's why I've been putting out like 4 episodes a week, because I want to tell these stories. I get so excited about it, about telling different stories and introducing my audience to different people, and it's all. I get in these kicks where I like do psychic mediums for a while, and then I go through and I don't know, do some paranormal stuff, and then I'll talk with, I don't know. I just feel like I really get into these like topics or these grooves that I get stuck on. But I think I've kind of got past that, and I have a pretty big variety of different guests now, where I've interviewed Jesse Courtnam, who came out. He's a gay hockey player and came out, and his whole story went viral. He was on the Drew Barrymore show. Then he came back on my show with AJ Olivey, and AJ is a out basketball player, and I had the opportunity to interview them together. And AJ was married for 18 months and came out publicly. I mean, it was just amazing stories. And some stories really do. Some of the stories I've done and people I've met have changed my whole perspective of who I am. And I've had friends and family that listen to my podcast like actually make a comment on that. So, my aunt, for example, who I'm very close with, and she said that she has noticed my change in the way that I think about, or the way I not think about, but how I communicate about transgender people. That she sees me as not just being like, okay, yeah, they're part of the LGBTQ plus community, but which is probably how I felt at one point, where now I feel like they're part of my community and I need to stand up for them because they are part of my group. They're part of my people. And so that is like a major change in my life. I, knew transgender people and would see transgender people, and I never really, I don't know, like I didn't think of it one way or the other really. Like I just kind of like thought, okay, yeah, they're a person. But now I have changed the way I feel. I have another podcast called Listen Up Girl, where I do LGBTQ plus news in like 10 minutes or less most of the time. And I do so many stories about what's happening to gender affirming care, transgender youth, transgender in the military, all these rights being taken away, all the hundreds of bills that were put in over the last year to try to take away rights from transgender people. And it makes me so sad that this is the world that we live in, that less than 1% of the population is transgender, and they just want to live their life. They want to just be who they are. They're not hurting anyone. They're not doing anything bad to anyone. They just want to be who they were born as, and that's all they're looking to do. And this show has changed the way I see that. And I feel like I'm a better person because of the people that I have met, that have influenced the way I think, that have told me their stories. And it's just heartwarming to me that they're part of my community. And I've just have had a change. And I see the changes that have happened at a lot of big companies where, their DEI has kind of disappeared or slowly diminished, or they have less DEI happening. Back in 2020 when the Biden administration was in charge, or even the Obama administration, I feel like companies were really all in for DEI, all in for different employee resource network groups. And, you had Pride LGBTQ groups and African American groups and just all these different. They were celebrating Latin American History Month, and all those things were really big kind of celebrations and stuff. And now a lot of companies have kind of put that to the side, and because we have a racist president, and he does not care, and clearly what he's been putting up on his social media recently shows that he does not care about people that are different from him. So I could go into that and really make this a political statement, but I'm not. I just wanted to say how I have changed, and I appreciate the guests that have come on my show and have opened my mind up. And it just has made me a better person, and it makes me a better part of the community. And that's who I am. And you're going to hear from my guest today. Her name is Willow. And Willow is a person that is not trying to make people understand about pronouns or things like that, people always say, oh, you're woke, you're using pronouns and all this. Willow is trying to change just the whole structure of the way people think. And I just appreciate what she's doing. She's so caring. I had such a great conversation with her. Whenever I left that conversation that day, like, she's one of those people that I had in the back of my mind, and just thinking, like, I felt so lucky to be able to interview somebody like her, because she cares so much, and she's so passionate about what she's doing. So I hope you enjoy my episode with Willow, and I hope my show influences you in the way that you think about people. Thanks for listening. Hi, thanks for joining me on the Everything and Anything in a Big Gay podcast. I'm your host, Zach Randalls Friedman. Today's conversation is not about rainbow logos, Pride Month, merch, or even checking diversity boxes. It's about power, it's about systems, and it's about what real LGBTQ plus liberation actually requires. My guest today is Willow, a thinker, a practitioner, a truth teller who refuses to let inclusion be reduced to corporate performance. Willow's work changes heteronormative and cisnormative systems at their roots, centering queer liberation theory, lived experiences, and the voices most often pushed to the margin. So welcome to the show, Willow.
Thanks so much, Zach. It is good to be here.
So I did some research on you, on who you were and stuff, and I think you're a perfect guest for today's world and what's happening in it. I wanted to start off to ask you a couple of questions. When people hear LGBTQ plus inclusions, they often think pride flags and getting pronouns right. And what do you mean when you say inclusion is actually about dismantling the systems?
Yeah. So, Zach, you're pointing to something very interesting that we've seen, right? We've seen pride flags. We've seen people put their pronouns in corporate signatures. But sometimes that's just a form of what we call rainbow washing, where on the surface, there's a veneer of acceptance and welcoming, but actually under the surface, that's not quite what's happening. So when I'm thinking about systems, whether they need to be deconstructed or reconstructed, in organizations, I'm thinking about and talking about culture. So not just the veneer on top, but if there's actually a culture of welcoming and actual inclusion, and not just kind of word salad that sounds good.
And at what point do you think that kind of corporate inclusion efforts were performative and they became transformative? Because I worked at companies where I've seen them really grab a hold of DEI, and not just for LGBTQ plus, but across all, employee resource groups. There was a Asian Pacific American group. There was a Black group, a Latino group. There was different group, veterans group. I mean, they had one company I worked for had, different, and they were like, trying to make sure everybody felt included and it was an inclusive environment. And even like, I know pronouns are kind of old news for some people, but they made sure, like, even in your Zoom, like it said, if what your pronouns were, like they really wanted people to feel comfortable and recognized in who they were. I worked for a couple of companies that were really great at this. And now I look in the news and I hear all these companies are not the ones that I worked for, but other companies are completely removing DEI from everything. Like they're not even on social media, for Pride Month, they're not celebrating that. Or Trans Awareness Day or Week, they're not doing anything like that. And not just focusing on the LGBTQ plus, but Juneteenth, like some of them didn't even recognize that, and it's a public holiday. So what is your thoughts on companies backing away from this because of where the United States is now?
Yeah, in some ways, it's both good and bad. Here's what I mean by good, because that might
Okay, yeah,
sound a
tell
little
me. I would love to hear that.
controversial.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, I think the stepping away from the rainbow washing and showing one's true colors is actually more helpful to LGBT people who might be employed at these companies,
Mhm.
right? If at the end of the day, the profit motive is going to determine policy, that means which side of which side of this you're going to be on, right? If there's a battle line that's drawn politically or socially, and a company is deciding that, well, to exclude queer people is going to be better for our
Mhm.
shareholders or for random people on social media, then we're going to pick that over our employees.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by good. It can be good to know which places are actually safe and which places are actually
Yeah,
performative.
I never thought of it that way. That's true.
I would say, in terms of why this is not so good, is that a big part of wider culture, not just organizational culture, is what we might call permission structures, right? So we're thinking about, what does polite society view as acceptable? In a
Mhm.
world in which we have normalized the pronouns in the signature, in which we have normalized the rainbow flags, even if an organization is not, say, super legitimately into helping queer people feel more welcomed,
Yeah.
the fact that they're adding these signifiers, even if they're performative, is helping to kind of shift that window of the permission structures being more acceptable to LGBT people, because you're
Mhm.
seeing it everywhere. And so when that seeing it everywhere starts to decline, this is kind of lessening the permission structure for LGBT people to be more open and public about who they are.
Yeah. How do you kind of see, like, the cis normative systems erasing, trans and non-binary people, even with organizations claim to be inclusive?
Yeah, this is the one that's so interesting to me, because I think looking at gender expansiveness helps everybody,
Mhm.
right? It helps us question some of the norms that come to be within cisgender defaultness.
Mhm.
And so it's always funny to me, because I think of many of the types of inclusion work that organizations are doing often help everyone, right?
Yeah.
It isn't just for queer people, it's for everybody to see this sense of openness and how to ask questions and how to welcome people differently from you. And so I think what's been interesting is that we've been seeing not just the lessening of DEI, but also of the positive outcomes for cisgendered people, right?
Yeah.
So as folks have moved away from being accepting of trans people and, for instance, using bathrooms, we've seen more cisgender women get questioned in bathrooms. And that's kind of the overarching effect of when some one community gets downtrodden, if it affects with ripples everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, there was a woman, it was in a southern state. I can't remember the full story. The overall was she was a lesbian woman. She was in the bathroom with her lesbian partner, and someone that worked in the restaurant came in and said, "Get out of here. You're in the wrong bathroom." And she goes, "No, I'm a woman. I have breasts." And she says, "No." And so she basically had to show the woman her breast in order to use the bathroom. I'm like, where do we live? Like, this is insane to me. Like, these stories just make me just sick to my stomach, thinking that a woman is just trying to use the bathroom in a restaurant, and you have someone coming in harassing her because she has short hair and maybe, she wasn't dressed as what the woman that worked there wanted a female to look like, and
Mhm.
it's just insane to me. Like um so sorry, I went on a little rant there.
No, I'm with you.
So kind of tell me how organizations kind of unknowingly ask LGBTQ plus employees to contort themselves to be the professional norm.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question because this can happen in very obvious,
Mhm.
overt ways. For instance, non binary folks not being allowed to say, publicly display their pronouns. But there's also these kind of administrative red tape ways. I see this sometimes because one of the things I do in my work is look at technology systems.
Mhm.
So this is a very niche thing, but I think as I explain it, you'll see how it's under the surface, but still relates to a lot of exclusion.
Yeah.
So, for instance, a lot of systems that people might use to see more about LGBT customers or clients. So, for
Yeah.
instance, if you call a doctor's office, they're going to
Yeah.
look you up. It's interesting because some doctor's offices or companies will have a spot for somebody to put a preferred name. Computer programs are just databases, right? You can have that pop up first. You can have
Yeah.
that be searchable. You can have that be the default thing that comes up. But if you're not listening to LGBT people, you're not necessarily thinking about that, right? You're
Yeah.
just thinking about we have a receptionist and they need to answer the phone and get somebody's appointment scheduled. And so there's little things like that that just are red tape, right? I think another thing that relates to this as well is just the structure of what is considered to be normal. It's the little things, right? If it's a bring your spouse to work day, is this open to any sort of arrangement of
Mhm.
genders,
Yeah.
same-sex marriage and things like that? Is there understanding that families might look a little bit different if there are two dads, two moms? And are we creating environments where we expect the gender segregation to be there? Or do things break if it's not? So it's things like that that I think just having a few LGBT folks in your ear, keeping you mindful of this, I think it can be pretty easily avoided.
And we'll be right back. Okay, and now back to the show. So let's take away like where the current US White House administration is with everything. Let's take that away for a second. And we look at you know, I don't know what generation you're in. So I'm Generation X. And so, when I grew up, being in high school, and you would never come out as gay or
Mm.
bi or lesbian or transgender in high school. Like there's just no way. And I grew up in the Miami area, and it was definitely a place you wouldn't have done it then. Now my friends that have kids that are in high school and junior high, or my family that their kids are coming out in junior high, or they're coming out. I have a cousin, or my cousin's. Um, I'm trying to think what the pronoun is that they're using. I'll just say my cousin's child is transgender now, or is using. Um, and let me think how I can say this because I don't want to insult them. So they were born female. They are now going by he, him. And so he is, just living his life. And, there's a few little kind of hiccups and stuff that has happened. But for the most part, like they don't care. Nobody cares. Like nobody is like, there's no school bullying. Really, I don't think there's not much school bullying. I mean, there may be a little bit because kids, I think, are just mean overall. But back in whenever I was in junior high and high school, if you would have even come out and said as a guy, "Oh, I think that guy's a good-looking guy," you would have been bullied and beat up and stuff. And now I think it's changed. So long way to get around this question is like I feel like generations now, like even the generations that are in their 20s are more open-minded to LGBTQ plus than previous generations. Do you agree with that, or do you think we're in some ways going backwards again?
Yeah. So yes and no, I think, and it depends which generations you poll or look at. So if we're talking about kind of youngest millennials into the generations after, you do kind of see a more what we might consider progressive attitude
Mhm.
towards things in general, like reproductive health care or LGBT issues.
Yeah.
In this very current generation that we're in, we are seeing that trend continue, but only for women and girls. The
Mm.
younger the men, the more we see this slide into much more hardcore, extreme agitator ideologies, right? So we might think of like the manosphere type of politics, for instance. So yes, I think overall culture has been much more forward facing about these things. But the current generation that we've encountered for young men and boys, we are seeing this, a bit of a shift away from full acceptance of LGBT people.
And are you talking about high school, junior high, college now? Is that the ages you're talking?
Yes.
That's disappointing. That is not what I wanted to hear because I thought we
Yeah.
were.
Sorry.
Yeah. I guess I just, I want everybody to accept for everybody who they are and stuff. And that's where I felt like we were going, a couple of years ago. And now I just feel like people are showing their true colors, unfortunately. And so, um, whenever you're kind of working with these organizations, so two questions. What do you see most positive coming out of organizations today? And what are you most worried about that you're seeing in organizations today?
Yeah, I'll start with the least fun answer. What am I most worried about? Um, a lot of my work does involve nonprofits, just because there's maybe a little bit less of a corporate thing telling them what they
Mhm.
can and cannot do about things like DEI.
Yeah.
Of course, this previous year with changes in the federal administration, there's been specific explicit targeting of DEI when it comes to funding for
Mhm.
nonprofits, which nonprofits absolutely need. But if your nonprofit is focused on specific work that gets labeled as DEI, and I'm not even talking about like something that sounds extreme, really what's being flagged in grant applications is like the word woman. Like that's too DEI for people. It's too extreme, too progressive. So my biggest concern right now, and I've seen this across the board, is funding for organizations.
Mm.
Right, one way around this is to get rid of DEI. Right, to stop those programs. Obviously, if you're like an LGBT org, that's a little bit harder to get around. But
Yeah.
you are a 211, if you are a YWCA, there might be a temptation to back away from certain types of programs just so you keep the lights on. So that's my biggest worry.
Yeah.
I would say that the thing that I find most positive is in some ways kind of the opposite side of this coin. As we've been mentioning, the rainbow washing is done, the true colors are showing. But what that also means is that the people who really care, like really care, and make that clear and make that known, and are aware that they're operating into a space of potential sacrifice or targeting or harassment in social media. So the places that are welcoming to LGBT people are profoundly welcoming and sincerely welcoming and not just performative.
Yeah. That's good to hear. And that makes a lot of sense. I think that some companies aren't doing as much with, DEI and supporting the LGBTQ plus community or any diversity and inclusion. But I know some of the leaders in some of these companies, and they actually are very caring and stuff. I think for some reason they're just doing it because they're following what other companies are doing in some ways. So, um, you think this will change in a few years once the government maybe possibly changes?
That's this is a good conversation topic because I think it will change in some complicated ways.
Okay.
I think in sort of this maybe Obama era of people being very into what we might consider like virtue signaling, I think
Yeah.
that era is done. I think a performative way of thinking about social justice and issues, I don't think people are going to be into that as much anymore because the insincerity has become very obvious, right? The authenticity is very clear. If it's not a part of many corporate brands that have been doing the rainbow washing.
Mhm.
So I think even in, say, a new, welcoming, progressive administration, I don't think we're going to see Target necessarily becoming sort of this bastion of DEI like they were in the past, right? This is, something that costs money, costs resources, and just isn't worth it if, in many cases, LGBT or progressive shoppers have already left. And obviously, you see on the news all the time, their sales numbers are down even more and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. I think on the other side, though, what I think is more helpful than this performative rainbow washing is actual policy. So, for instance, this is a little bit boring, but very quickly, by way of example, in 2024, there was an adjustment to part of the Civil Rights Act, Title
Mhm.
IX, which basically updated the rules for discrimination. I think we're all aware that you can't discriminate on the basis of race, of military status, blah, blah, blah. Um, this updated Title IX policy explicitly included gender identity and sexual orientation. However, in the most recent administration, I think in February or March, there was an executive order that basically moved this back a notch. And so this gender identity portion is no longer a part of Title IX. I think those sorts of things might return. These are a little bit more administrative, a little
Yeah.
bit more under the radar. And I think that that's actually a good thing because if somebody's being discriminated against in the workplace and things like that, some of those sort of less sexy things I think will return, right? The rainbow washing may not be back, but I think we'll see the administrative things return and hopefully be strengthened.
So I love the rainbow washing term. I've never heard that before until speaking with you. So, and it makes so much sense because I also think not just rainbow washing, but since Trump has been in office, just people in general, you know who they are now more. Like people are showing who they really are, their true colors. If they support, you know, they're, I really don't want to get political, but if they're supporting ICE and they're supporting, women's rights and those things, people feel much more free to express maybe how they've always felt, or maybe, the Trump administration, the MAGA people have changed their minds, but people do not hold back. And we see it, I see it on social media all the time on TikTok and stuff where, Karens are coming after, a Black woman driving through a neighborhood to see her friend that lives there. And they're like, why are you here? And stuff. And it's just, that never would have happened, I feel like, 8 years ago or whatever. So, or however long before 2016. Like, I felt like that. I felt like we were so much in a better place. I feel like we took 20 steps forward with Obama. And now we've taken so many steps back. And I hope we can get a little more. We can take a few more steps forward in the near future. So,
With you on that.
I want to know kind of what your thoughts are about, LGBTQ plus people are some are going through a lot of trauma and things now, whether it's their own personal issues, the issues that they're facing with having their rights possibly taken away, or family issues that they're having and rejection or religious discrimination. So how do you see that coming into the workplace today? Do you see it coming in more than it has previously?
Yes, I think in a lot of ways you see this conflict coming about as a result of people bringing in these First Amendment sorts of
Mhm.
questions where people are making it such or setting up a situation as such where it's one's so-called religious rights against queer identity.
Yeah.
There's been this very recent case of a student that wrote a very bad paper for a college essay, and in a lot of ways appears to be targeted towards the trans TA. Right. So this person's paper did not meet the criteria for the assignment. It did not cite its sources properly, which is plagiarization. You can get kicked out of school for that.
Mhm.
But because this person was writing about something related to gender and how they thought that the Bible spoke of gender ideology as being demonic, this person has become sort of a martyr for people on that end of the ideological spectrum, right? So it's kind of like, look, this person wrote a really bad essay that
Mm.
was barely at sort of the junior high level. That's the actual problem. But what's being shoehorned is this so-called religious rights thing going on. Same thing happening with these attacks on conversion therapy bans, right?
Yeah,
So
I want to talk about that too.
yeah, I mean, but it's a similar thing. The current case is going on in Colorado.
Mhm.
There's one going on in Michigan. The Colorado one's going to the Supreme Court, where this person is basically claiming, "Look, my religion says God made them male and female, and
Yeah.
so by telling me that I cannot practice conversion therapy. You're stepping on my religious rights. So I think that's where we're seeing this conflict come in, is that people are manufacturing these issues to pit themselves against queer folks.
And we'll be right back. Okay, now back to the show. I've interviewed people that have gone through conversion therapy, and there's one guy that I interviewed early in my podcast when it started, where he's really set up a nonprofit to help people, with conversion therapy that they've gone through, and he was amazing. Tell me, like, what you're seeing from the trauma that some people are going through, because it's not just like you're 15 or 16 or 11 or however you old are when you go to the conversion therapy and you go through it, and we know it doesn't work, but maybe you're pretending it worked or whatever happens. But it really impacts people for a long time. There was just an article that I read this weekend where a guy is maybe in his 60s and he still has the PTSD from having to go through conversion therapy at a young age. So what are you kind of seeing from people now? I know obviously there's a Supreme Court case, and or going to Supreme Court. But what's the trauma that you're seeing with people that have gone through conversion therapy?
Yeah. So, I mean, if we imagine conversion therapy as one part of this larger category of harms that is given the acronym SOGICE, SOGICE, or that stands for Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Change Efforts, of which conversion therapy is a kind of change effort. It's this whole umbrella of basically interventions that try to get queer people not to be queer. So when we're talking about trauma, especially complex trauma like CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, what we're seeing is there's a lot going on in the body, the embodied part of this, that can be hard to uncover just by, say, talking about it or having ideas about it. Right. I think if somebody is coming from, say, a religious environment where conversion therapy is practiced, it's one thing to sort of have a philosophical shift away from that. But if you're not taking care of the embodied part of that, your thoughts towards, oh, conversion therapy is harmful, isn't solving this somatic or embodied part of the trauma that also needs healing as well. So we think about complex PTSD and things like that. This often is stemming from situations where one is dealing with incongruences, right? So an incongruence is your family of origin is supposed to be a place of safety.
Yes.
And maybe it's safe in some places, except for the whole queer thing, right? Your family might be loving in a lot of areas, but send you to conversion therapy camp. So dealing with these sorts of things, having these very gray area things, not a black and white, can actually cause us, especially in these formative years, to not know how to process some of these things well or rightly. And so when anything kind of comes across us that is sort of triggering to us, it can cause us to relive some of these incongruencies, right? So if you felt this incongruent love, or what we might call an ambivalent love, so it's sort of loving sometimes and not so loving some other times. Let's say you're looking for a healthy, maybe queer relationship. But when you start to experience that love, your body is used to the ambivalence. It's used to the discordance.
Yep.
And so what might happen is your body starts experiencing stressors, even when there's not an actual stressor in front of you, right? Your happy, queer, affirming partner is not going to send you to conversion therapy, but because your body is used to equating love with that ambivalence, now it's kind of screwed up these other relationships. Now it's kind of gotten in your bones and it's poisoning these other parts of your life.
So how do people do that? They go to therapy to kind of work through it? Is that the best case, or is that the best answer?
Yeah, I think having what I like to call a care team can be helpful for this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So if somebody, especially if they are just coming out of these sorts of things, yes, get a licensed clinician, a therapist, social worker, psychologist to help you work through some of these specific things.
Yeah.
I've also found it helpful, and this is some of the recovery coaching work that I do. I love being a part of a care team. Most clinicians, obviously have this very, amazing skill set, but may not always have the same skills in knowing how to recover from, say, high control religious environments or
Mhm.
conversion therapy. And so sometimes I can help slot in somewhere to be able to provide sort of specialized recovery coaching alongside a clinician, or also maybe alongside a psychiatrist who's prescribing medication and things like that. I think getting help is the big thing. So that way you're kind of creating space, you're getting your foot in that door, and then you can throw it wide open through so many other things like finding healthy community, developing secure attachments outside of harmful and unaffirming or semi unaffirming environments. Creating that new community, I think, is a big, big part of healing.
Yeah. I also, not to stereotype white straight men, but I was just on a trip and two of my friends that were women were basically saying they were in the airport and this, going through the TSA security. And this white man, straight white man, just kind of walked up and skipped the line. And they're like, "Hey, we're in line." He's like, "Yeah, I got to go through." And just like dismissed them. And they felt very dismissed because they were women. And I'm just like, it's just unbelievable to me. I mean, it's hard for me to wrap my head around some of these things that happen today, or that I hear, or the stories that I read, or the videos that I watch, and it's right there in front of me. And this happened to them because they both said it. So, I mean, do you hear about this more often?
Yeah. And this goes back to this permission structure thing that I've been
Mhm.
mentioning. Like, how is the general polite society shifting on these things, right? It's a man's world out there, given the
Mhm.
wider political and social structures, right? There's this famous far right podcaster who had said, it's no longer my body, my choice. It's your body, my choice,
Yeah.
talking about himself basically essentially threatening to assault women, right? And nothing really bad came of that. There were basically no social consequences for that person saying that. And so in a world where you can have high-level politicians be rapists, in
Yeah.
a world where you can have people working with the kind of the largest global sex ring, like with
Mhm.
Jeffrey Epstein, and
Yeah.
have that sort of just be swept under the rug. Well, your average, normal, everyday person is not committing anything to the level of Jeffrey Epstein. So the permission structure and that permission window has definitely changed in favor of preventing, say, sanctions or social consequences for that type of abusive, coercive, dismissive behavior.
Do you ever step back and just be like, "How do we get here?" Like, I've done that a few times in the last 6 months, like, "How did we get here?" Like, y you know, how did we make it okay for the Jeffrey Epstein files not to be released for so long? And, just to kinda go back to social media, there's this guy that's on TikTok that I love because he goes to these, like, MAGA rallies, and he asks people questions that they actually say they support, but whenever he asks them, they actually don't support it. Or he'll ask them, "Do you think two men should get married?" And they're like, "No, the Bible says no." But he's like, and then he's questioning, like, "Okay, but why?" Because the Bible says so. But he's like, "Well, how does it hurt you?" And they're just like, "Well, it's wrong. They're going to hell and stuff." And just I just step back and just like, I just don't understand like how we got here for a lot of these things. Like, why do people care what other people are doing if it doesn't hurt them? If somebody's doing something that doesn't hurt you, like, why do you care? If somebody wants to marry the same sex, who cares? But yet, the whole sex trafficking, underage girls thing, it seems to be more accepted than transgender people. It's insane to me that this is where we are, and I just don't understand how we got here.
Yeah, I've seen this meme that's sort of kind of mocking the people who are anti trans people using the bathroom. And it says something along the lines of, why would a cisgender man pretend to be a trans woman to assault women
Yeah,
when men who assault women are treated with more respect than trans women? It's like
exactly.
that's the backwards type of culture we live in.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think your question is somewhat rhetorical, but I do have a bit of a thought
Yeah,
about
tell
it,
me.
which is to say, the reason why there is such an attack on newly found queer rights is because, in a lot of ways, queerness is the culture war endgame, right? If you can unlock the door on gender and make it acceptable that the center point of a relationship is not a man,
Yeah.
right? You're opening the door to all kinds of other ways in which cisgender men lose their power, right?
Yeah.
If you can say, hey, women can do the same things that men can do, what does the Catholic Church do then if the Pope and all of the bishops and cardinals, oh, well, we're all men, this,
Yeah.
their authority and leadership gets threatened, right? And so you have to stomp out this whole queer thing, because the structures that get threatened by queerness are some of the most powerful, money making, power centered structures in the whole world. So it makes sense that a handful of random queer people are actually worth the anger and might of these huge organizations. Because once you can unlock this door, and I think they know it, once you can unlock this door, the power of patriarchy can really be challenged. And I actually view that hopefully.
Me too. I really hope it happens. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Okay, now back to the show. I wish that people would kind of look at, transgender people a different way. I wish they would look at it so I'll give you an example. So I worked at a company where there was a guy that I worked with, or before I worked there, he came into the office for several years as his what he was born as a man. He always knew that he wanted to be, a woman, and so he made a very, very brave decision, in my opinion, and ended up, slowly kind of transitioning to what he feels he is. Like, this is what he was, even though on paper he was born as a male, this is who he really is. He's a female, or she's a female, I should say. And I want people to and whenever I started this company and I met her, and people would tell me stories about how she can't used to come into work as, a man before us. And I think it's the first time I've ever worked with somebody that did a transition in the middle of working somewhere, So, and I would always, like, I'd go to lunch with her, or, do things, with her outside of work a little bit here and there. And I'd always just think how incredibly brave it is that you come in and you could be judged by so many people. And obviously, when you walk into the office as the opposite gender that you were the day before, people are going to turn their heads and look and stuff. And she said that people have had a lot of questions, and she kind of, said, ask whatever you want respectfully. And now she's living her best life. She lives in New York City, which is much more acceptable of transgender people, but she's kind of gone over that hump. And my point is that I just wish that, people that are like, oh, I don't understand the transgender thing, I wish they would look at it a different way and just say, what did it take for them to go through their mind and process who they really are, and then to make that leap to be who they really are. There was another woman that I interviewed. Her name is Bernie. And she was one of my favorite guests because she came out as a woman and was her true self at the age of 66.
Wow.
And I love and her voice as a male is on the New York City subway. She's one of the voices of the New York City subway.
Oh,
And
yeah. Yeah.
I loved interviewing her. And I also, whenever I posted on my Instagram, you get the trolls and stuff. But as she got more positive feedback than the 3 or 4 trolls that wouldn't go away that I had to eventually block. But she got so much positivity from that. Her video exploded on YouTube. people were like, love this, love Bernie, love that she was brave, love, like, it was just so positive. And she wrote me several emails, just kind of, just saying, thank you for putting this out there. And like, I want to have her back on. I want to be her friend. I'm like, when I come to New York, like, I want to meet for coffee or drink or dinner or something, like, because I just want people to understand like how much bravery it takes to do something like this, and how much thought process has to go in, and how much you have to condition yourself to, like, okay, I'm going to go out in public for the first time like this. And I don't know. I want people to see that, and they don't. I mean, some people do, but not, I want everybody to see it that way.
I'm with you because really the gender affirmation and gender dysphoria is something that affects everybody, right?
Hmm.
We are all gendered and sexed people.
Yeah.
Um, it's not just for trans people, right?
Yeah.
Every cisgender person has a gender identity, and
Yeah.
sometimes they're very sensitive about, right?
Yeah.
Cisgender people, obviously, they're a much larger population than trans people, so this makes sense. But cisgender people are the folks getting gender affirming surgery way more,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Cisgender
Exactly.
men getting a breast reduction
Yeah.
is gender affirming surgery. There's
Yeah.
something dysphoric that cis man might feel when he looks in a mirror and sees breasts that look more like what one might expect on a woman,
Yeah.
right? So to take care of that, to have that gender affirming care is something we can all, should all
Yeah.
empathize with. And it's all of these things that we might do that help us to conceive of ourselves in the gender that we are. Not to make fun of straight men here. So just know this is my intention to
It's
and
not
bring this
mine really either, but
but I think the idea of folks using pills to do things in the bedroom, that's a
yeah.
form of gender affirming care because
Yeah.
how emasculating do many
Yeah.
cisgender men feel when they can't perform that way? That's
Yeah.
a pill, that's a medical intervention
Yeah.
that you are doing for the sake of avoiding a kind of gender dysphoria. So really this is a kind of thing that we all run into. We all have a sense of dysphoria that can hit us. We all have a sense of affirmation that can hit us.
Mhm.
And so I think really that gives us the obligation and responsibility of having empathy for other people, even if we don't understand them. Whether that's a cisgender person who expresses their gender in a way that's different from me, or a trans person that
Mhm.
expresses their gender in a way that's different from me.
Yeah. And I'll just say, like, I am definitely not picking on all cisgender, white, straight, male, because I have lots of uh, friends in that category that could care less about my sexuality. They just, my husband, who I've been together for 27 years, he
Wow.
has he has so many straight white males, and I love all them. They love all me. They don't care. They don't see me as any different. And so I'm definitely not at all picking. I think there's just there's a population, like, just like there's a population of gay guys that I don't like either. So I mean, so there's somebody in every group that I could do without. So
It's relatable.
um, so I just have a couple more questions. So what's one uncomfortable question every organization should be asking itself right now?
Hmm. Yeah. I think the question that gets asked a lot, I'm not saying this is the right one, but the question that gets asked a lot is, are we being legally compliant
Mm,
with executive orders or, you know, revocations of say Title IX, for instance? But I think that displays a bit of corporate irresponsibility. And I think probably something that goes against many of these organizations' mission statements, values statements, codes of conduct, right? When people are just looking at preemptively complying to things. For instance, executive orders can only apply to things going on in the government, right?
mhm.
Your random business is not beholden to an executive order. It's also not
Yeah,
law either.
yeah,
So it's like folks that are engaging in this preemptive compliance are actually missing the point. And rather than looking at this as an invitation to show off their values, it becomes sort of a chasing down of compliance and risk. and it becomes corporatized. So I
Yeah.
think that's the thing people are asking, but that's the wrong thing. What folks need to be asking is just the opposite of that. What are our values and how do we instantiate them?
Mm-hmm.
So I think values are very important to get right before some issue comes up. So, for instance, I do some work related to misconduct and abuse in organizations. And so, what often happens is folks haven't thought about putting the right things in place to either create policies that prevent situations where abuse could happen
Mm-hmm.
or creating proper channels of reporting or whistleblowing. And
Mm-hmm.
so when a situation happens, it has to get so bad that everything boils over for something to get fixed. It's like create the proper channels before they happen. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, heaven forbid, we don't want abuse or misconduct to happen. But if it does happen, you've got to have the right things set up. And so, yes, think about compliance and risk in situations. Have policies that prevent the types of situations that are bad. But at the same time, don't start from the position of we got to CYA in terms of legal stuff and risk. Rather, start with values. We care about our people. We want the best for our people. Well, the best for your people means not having open doors for abuse and misconduct. And the
Yeah.
same thing applies for LGBT folks. If your value is we care for all of our employees, well, all means all. Does that mean you
Yeah.
care for your LGBT employees too?
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. This was, if somebody wants to learn more about what you do or want to work with you, where could they find you?
Yeah, so I've got a website, Willow Sipling, SIPLING.com, willowsipling.com. That shows a whole list of the types of things I do from HR to coaching to research and things like that. I also have a blog at spotlightonSociety.com, and that's about social sciencey type things and research and sometimes podcasts like this.
How did you get into this whole field? Like, what made you want to start doing the research and help people? Like, was there something that kind of, I don't know, triggered you to like, this is my passion?
Yeah, I mean, like many queer folks, I'm a survivor of sogice, so
Mhm.
that's kind of in my system and wanting other folks to not have to deal with that in terms of specifically queer advocacy. As an intersex person, that was confusing for me when I hit puberty. And
Mhm.
honestly, a lot of those issues could have been resolved with things like inclusive sex ed and
Mhm.
conversations about queer things and LGBT identity. I don't want other people to have to go through what I have gone through
Yeah.
for getting to understand more about myself and things like that. So that's honestly, in some ways, it's very much based on this empathy thing that I've been talking about, which is to say, it hasn't always been easy, and a lot of those not so easy things were completely preventable. And
Mhm.
so, why not make a better path for other people? And then
Yeah.
HR just ended up being a great way to try to
Yeah.
actually create material change for people. So that's why I've been doing that, and the coaching kind of a similar thing there. So that's the reasons why.
I feel so lucky though that I've never had to work for a company that didn't accept who I was. Like I feel like I'm one
Mm.
of the lucky people in this world that every company I've ever worked at has been accepting. I mean, even though early in my career I didn't say like what I was or talk about my husband or anything like that, or marriage wasn't even legal then. But I've always been, so lucky with every manager that I've had. I'm sure they knew I was gay. But yeah, I don't know. I'm one of the lucky ones that didn't. I've never been terrorized at work or anything. So I will put your blog and your website in the description of this podcast or video. So if somebody didn't write it down, you can just go to the description and it will be there. And I love these type of conversations. I love people like you that care about the community. And so thank you for being such an amazing guest and being on the show today.
Well, Zach, thank you for your work in spreading the queer joy and getting these queer voices out there. It means a lot. So thank you. Thank you for doing some of this that I've been talking about, raising awareness, giving people resources. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And so it's So Joyce, right? Is that what it is?
So Jice. Yeah.
So Jice, so Jice, so Jice. So we want to get that word out there. So
That's right.
I will actually put that in the description of the podcast too. So people will start to, it will start resonating with people.
I do actually have a web page that I bought
Oh,
the domain name sogice.com, SOGICE.com. It does like one of those redirects that takes you to a page on my site with some definitions about sogice. So
that's
yeah.
going to that will be in the description too. So thank you so much. You're
Absolutely.
awesome, Willow. Thanks for being on. Please, everybody, if you're not subscribing, please do. Also, if you think this conversation would want to be heard by somebody else that needs to hear it, please share the episode and leave a comment and check out Willow's website and blog. So thanks for joining, everybody. Thanks again, Willow.